Welcome to Sports Map Houston. I'm Brandon Strange. He's Josh Jordan. Hit like and subscribe on the channel. We do appreciate it. Hey, Josh, welcome in. The other day I was listening to our guys, John and Lance, on the bench on ESPN 97.5, and Lance made an interesting case for the Texans rebuild. He said because of the sheer amount of starters the Texans are going to have to replace in the coming season, and by his count, he said he thinks 12 starters on this roster.
12?
Yeah, are going to have to be replaced.
More than half.
Yes. 12 starters are going to have to be replaced on this team. He says there's a case to be made that the Texans don't go for that elite quarterback in the draft. He thinks that you can build this team up around Mills, a la what the Texans did with Matt Schaub, where you have a really high-powered offense around him and a really solid defense on the other side of the ball, and then you can get by with a game manager the way Schaub was. What do you think about the idea of not going after that elite franchise quarterback?
I could see why Nick Caserio would be intrigued by doing something like that, because there are so many holes to fill on this team. There really are. And if you look at it, it's also your tackles. Like, we're not even thinking about that, but Titus Howard and Laramie Tunsil, they're free agents after 2023. Yep. So, in the fact that it's hard to find a left tackle outside of the first round, that might be something that he's looking at too. But also, you got to fix defensive tackle and linebacker. They can't stop the run. I think you need another safety too. I don't think Owens is the answer there. Like I said, pass rusher, there's a lot to replace here. So then argument could be made that you try and build up everything around the quarterback. And then Caserio could also look at it too. Like, is there enough around Mills? Are we grading him fairly if we don't surround him with a lot of talent? And you could also say, Mills, there's still plenty of season left. We don't know how he's going to perform the rest of the way. Right. And Caserio drafted him. He must like him on some level. So I will say that that's a possibility. And Lance said he would entertain it. But I think as a Houston fan, and you know this, Brandon, when we have the first overall pick, there's hardly ever a top-tier quarterback in that draft. We think back to Mario Williams and Jadeveon Clowney. And then just this past year with Derek Stingley Jr., there are 4 quarterbacks that are projected to go in the top 10 of this draft. 4. So I got to think the Texans got to get one of those guys. They can use one of the Browns picks to go get a left tackle in the first round. I think that's the way I would go with it. But you never know. Caserio might see it as, hey, let's just get a couple, positional players, and then maybe use some extra picks to trade into the back of the first round. Maybe there's a quarterback that they like that's not one of those top 4 guys, kind of like when Lamar Jackson got drafted at the very back end of the first round. Maybe they go that route.
Yeah, and a couple things off of that. One is a good defensive end can be a franchise changer for you. If you can, get a monster on the defense who's really chasing the quarterback and keeps their offense off the field, there's something to be said for that too. And like you said, there's quarterbacks to be had all throughout the draft, and so maybe you don't have to go chase that big franchise quarterback. But in the same way you talked about the past in which they've had that first round, that number 1 pick, and years in which they did get a guy like Mario Williams. Vince Young was there, and we thought that was the pick to get. And it turned out Mario Williams was the right pick when it was all said and done. But you're right. What this team has really missed until they were able to get Deshaun Watson was being able to draft a high-tier franchise-changing quarterback. And so I think you'd be really hard-pressed to convince this fan base to do something other than replace what you lost with Deshaun Watson. Now, I will ask you this. Here's the caveat to that, is if you go that route, if you went plan B, that's nice to say. That's good in theory, but do you trust Nick Caserio to be the guy who's filling up the roster that's so robust that you really don't need a franchise quarterback?
Yes. Look, a little shine has come off him from his first draft, the Davis Mills draft, because everybody was applauding him and saying all these great things before the season started. What a steal, Davis Mills in the third round. You got Lopez in the sixth and Nico Collins in the third. And Nico does look like a good pick. Mm-hmm. Lopez was a good pick for the sixth round, but I think he's one of those guys Lance is talking about that needs to be replaced, that he's just kind of a backup level player. So with Nick, I trust him to – I like this year's draft. Let's put it that way. So he has built some credibility this year in this year's draft. I'll also say for Texans fans, the defense has only given up 23 points a game this year. That's not, something that's insurmountable.
It seems worse, though, right? Because of how much they've just been absolutely skewered on the ground, and then the collapses at the end of games, giving up the big passes. But to your point, that's not been the problem necessarily.
No, and we see how many conversations have we had about if the Texans just had average quarterback play in the first few games of the season, then we think they'd have at least a couple wins.
Yeah.
So maybe they're closer than we think, and Mills is the problem, and that's what the fan base seems to think. And at this point, you can't bet that Mills – I do this in fantasy football, right? The whole thing is you have to predict what's most likely to happen. It's never going to always be right. You're never going to get them all, but the job is to predict what's most likely to happen. Same thing with Caserio and Davis Mills. What's more likely to happen? That he's your franchise quarterback, or that this third-round pick, he's not quite there. He's always just going to be a good backup. I think that's probably more likely.
There's so much room for error in both scenarios, which is if you miss on your franchise quarterback, you miss. And people do that all the time. I mean, we miss all the time. And it doesn't give you necessarily the most confidence when Caserio was the guy who brought in Mills.
Completely true. But I will say this, at least Mills looks like a competent backup-ish type quarterback. If he plays better, maybe he could be a low-end starter. So at least he's not a total disaster like Tom Savage or, somebody like that. He's playing better than that. But to your point, Brandon, I think you like your odds better if you take one of these consensus quarterbacks. Like I said, there are about 4 that are being mocked into the top 10. I think your odds are better there because to me it's more risky to pass on one of those guys and then have Nick Caserio act like maybe I'm the smartest guy in the room. Yeah. I'm going to pass on those guys and then try and pluck a quarterback in the late 20s, early 30s in the first round. And then you have to give up more draft picks to trade back into the first round. And if you miss on that guy who's more risky and you gave up part of your future to do that, man, I don't know. To me, there's too many balls up in the air right there. I think you just go a little more safe. You take who you think is the best quarterback in the draft with your first pick, and then I think you address whether it's left tackle or pass rusher. You go after one of those other elite positions with your second pick in the first round.
It's also important to remember, too, that even with prime Deshaun Watson, the Texans finished with 4 wins.
4.
So it's you can have your franchise quarterback and it still not be right. So it's going to be the onus is on Nick Caserio. He has to build up this roster. He has to make it your franchise QB isn't going to be the end all be all. So he's going to have to do all of it. He's going to have to find a competent quarterback that can lead the team, and he's going to have to build up all the other spots because again, like Lance pointed out, you're going to have so much turnover in your starters that you're just going to have to make a lot of good decisions to be able to build this team up because of the state in which he inherited from. But after next year, there's not going to be any more excuses. You can't say that, this is just what he's inherited because he'll have 3 full years with this roster and building it. And if it's not any better then, it's really going to be on Nick at that point, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, who else is there, to blame for that? And what worries me a little bit about Nick is, the David Culley hire. That still kind of bothers me that, I want to trust Nick. He's done a lot of great things, so I kind of want to give him a mulligan. It was his first coach hire. But, the fact that he sat down across from that guy and talked football and went like, yeah, you're the guy, and hired him, that worried me a little bit. But to put a bow on it, I think the Texans have an extra win or two this year if they just have a quarterback that can kind of escape pressure and pick up a first down with his legs. If they had somebody that had that, that ability, I think we'd be looking at something different. As much as I like Mills, we're depending on him to get much better with the mental part of the game. Getting better at his reads, getting better at anticipating the pass rush and stepping up. And he doesn't have that other ability to just take off when things break down. Right. And the way the NFL is going these days, You have to be elite at that. You have to be a Tom Brady. You have to be an Aaron Rodgers to win in that manner. And I don't know if Davis Mills is quite there. Well, I know he's not quite there. I don't know if he's going to ever get there.
No, but I think if it's all said and done, Davis Mills could work out for you in two ways. One is as a third rounder, you wouldn't hate it if he ends up being your backup quarterback.
Yeah.
And then two is Davis Mills could end up being so bad this season that he ends up getting you your next franchise quarterback. We'll see how that plays out. Josh, I appreciate the time as always. We'll talk to you soon, buddy. You have to hit right on more than less. Hold on one second.